The cow had been licking the same stone for 7 days straight. Each evening at dusk, as the sun dropped low over the brittle fences of Cinderfield, she would break from the herd and make her way to the pasture's edge, not to graze, not to rest, but to kneel, lower her long neck, and press her tongue slow and deliberate to the surface of a pale, round stone buried halfway in the dirt. Josiah Bellamy watched her from the porch with a tin cup of cool coffee and a kind of tiredness that had no name. The stone wasn't large, but it caught light oddly, neither smooth nor jagged, worn by time, not by weather. He'd touched it once, thinking it a marker of some kind, perhaps a boundary stone or one of the old grindstones tossed into the field generations back. But it wasn't heavy, and it wasn't cold. In fact, the first time he pressed his fingers to it, it felt warm. Too warm for late October. Too warm for something half buried in dry soil. He didn't mention it to anyone. Men who talked to cows or stare at rocks for too long were looked at sideways in towns like Cinderfield. Josiah had already used up all the sideways glances folks were willing to give. He was the kind of man who walked into the general store and cleared space without saying a word. 6'3", square-shouldered, with hands like stone and eyes like smoke. Not cruel, not unkind, just quiet and childless. His wife had passed 11 winters ago, and the land hadn't felt warm since. He kept the house swept, the barn mended, the fences straight. But everything was missing something, like bread without salt. He owned 12 cows, but only one had a name, Willow. She'd been born the year Margaret died, and Josiah had once sworn he'd never name anything again. But this one came out small and trembling and with eyes too wide, and when she refused to nurse her first 3 days, he stayed by her side, whispering, almost ashamed. He never admitted he prayed over a cow, but the name slipped out one night when he said it aloud, half asleep. Willow. And now Willow was licking at stone like it held salt or memory or something deeper. The other cows didn't seem to care, but she returned like a churchgoer to a pew, always at dusk, always silent, always licking. On the 8th day, Josiah walked down to the fence with slow steps. He crouched beside her, brushing the dust off his knees. Willow turned to look at him with deep, wet eyes and gave one soft grunt before bowing back to the stone. Josiah ran his fingers over the surface again. It was warmer now. Not sun-warm, bone-warm, like it remembered something. A soft voice behind him made him flinch. She used to come here, too. Josiah turned. A woman stood beyond the fence, holding a bundle of cloth wrapped in twine. She was younger than him, maybe late 20s, with earth-brown eyes and cheeks pink from sun and wind. Her dress was simple, linen patched at the elbows, hem dipped in dust. She had the look of someone who did quiet work with steady hands. And he didn't know her name. "I don't mean the cow," she added softly. "I mean my mother. She used to kneel right there, before the church burned." Josiah looked down at the stone again. That church. She nodded. Well, what was left of it? He remembered now. The church beside the pasture had collapsed during the flood 10 years back. The bell tower fell first, then the steeple. Folks never rebuilt it. Instead, they put up a wire fence and planted around it. Time did the rest. "I never saw your mother here," Josiah said. "You wouldn't have. She came at dusk, same time as your cow." Josiah didn't ask how she knew where his cow stood. Some things didn't need answering. He stood, brushing dirt from his palms. "You live near?" "Down by the dry well. Reyes' place." That name tickled something in him. Reyes. He remembered a preacher with that name. Thin man. Carried a book with a red ribbon in it. Disappeared after the raids. Town said he ran. Or worse. "I'm Alma," she said. "I sell linens. Do you need any?" "No." Josiah hesitated. "Maybe." She smiled, the kind of smile that didn't expect to be returned. Then she looked at the stone. "Don't dig it up," she said. "I didn't say I would." "No," she said, softer now. "But you want to." He said nothing. "There's something under it," she whispered. "My father." He knelt here once. And the next day he was gone. Josiah felt something heavy stir in his gut. Not fear, not curiosity, just a slow uncoiling of something long buried. Alma left without another word. Josiah watched her go, the bundle of cloth still untouched in her arms. She didn't walk fast, but she didn't look back. That night, Josiah couldn't sleep. He kept hearing Willow grunt at the stone, soft and rhythmic, like a hymn. He rose before dawn and took a lantern out to the pasture. The grass was slick with dew, and the sky still held the last scraps of stars. Willow stood beside the stone, her head lowered, her tongue paused mid-lick. She looked at him once, then stepped back. Josiah dropped to one knee and touched the stone again, still warm, but now trembling, almost like breath. He reached for the spade he'd carried with him. He pressed the blade down. The dirt gave easily. The first scoop smelled like clay and smoke. The second uncovered something black, burnt wood, maybe, or bone. A third, then a fourth, and then a sound, not from the ground, from behind him. A voice. "You shouldn't be doing that." Josiah turned. The sheriff stood near the fence, hat low, hand resting on the butt of his holster. "Didn't think digging was illegal," Josiah muttered. "It ain't," the sheriff said. "But memory is a fragile thing around here. Dig deep enough, and it don't just bring up bones. It brings up stories. And some of us are trying to forget." Josiah stood slowly, leaning on the spade. "Then maybe you buried the wrong thing." The sheriff didn't move. "Leave it alone, Bellamy. You got good cattle, a quiet life. Don't stir ghosts." Josiah watched him walk away. Willow returned to the stone and licked it once, then again. He left the hole open. That afternoon, Alma returned. She didn't speak, just stood by the fence, eyes on the turned soil. Then, as if deciding something deep inside her had tipped, she knelt. She pressed her palm to the earth, just above the shallow hole. Her eyes closed. Her lips moved. A prayer or a memory. Josiah didn't interrupt. He stood beside her, silent as a gravestone. The wind picked up, dry and restless. And far off, the other cows began to stir. The next morning, the sky hung low like a lid over the world, dull and pewter-colored, with clouds that threatened rain but gave nothing. Josiah stood at the edge of the hole, with a shovel in hand and silence in his mouth. The wind had shifted in the night. Cooler now, carried with it a strange scent. Damp soil, old wood, something like rusted iron and sorrow. Willow wasn't by the stone this time. She watched from a distance, tail flicking absently, head bowed, as if waiting for permission to approach. Josiah placed the tip of the shovel where the earth had been disturbed and pressed down. The blade sank deeper than expected, the soil soft, loamy in a way it hadn't been in years. This patch had once belonged to a creek, decades back. He remembered as a boy the trickle of water that sang past the fence during summer storms. Now it was just dry land. But today, it felt different. With each lift of the shovel, the dirt gave way without resistance. Beneath the surface, tangled roots curled like old handwriting. They wrapped around something round, wooden, not recent, not clean. He brushed away the soil with his fingers, gentle as prayer. It was a cross, hand-carved, split at the base and scorched on one side, small enough to have been held by a child or left by someone in a hurry. There was no name, just a faint symbol etched into the top arm, an open eye surrounded by rays. Josiah's throat tightened. He had seen that symbol once, painted in red, years ago, on the church's pulpit wall before the flood wiped the structure clean. Footsteps crunched behind him. Alma stood there, hair tied back, apron dusted with flour, a soft blue shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. She looked not surprised, but already grieving, as if she'd known what would come up from the ground before he ever touched it. "I told you not to dig," she said, but there was no anger in her voice, only a quiet ache, like a piano played with missing keys. "I had to," Josiah murmured. "You know I did." She nodded, eyes fixed on the small cross resting in his hand. "That mark," she began, then stopped. Josiah waited. When she didn't continue, he said, "It was your father's, wasn't it?" Alma's eyes closed. "He carved it for me, said it would keep me safe. When I was 5, Josiah knelt, placing the cross gently back into the soil like a returned keepsake. He didn't cover it. Not yet. What happened to him, Alma? She exhaled, a breath long held. They say he ran, that he feared prison, that he sheltered those he wasn't supposed to. She looked past Josiah, toward the hills. But I remember him standing in the doorway. He kissed my head and said he'd be back by nightfall, and he never came back. Alma shook her head, and the town never asked why. A hawk cried overhead, circling once before drifting toward the mountains. Josiah rose and leaned on the shovel. They buried him here? No, they made him disappear. She turned, voice quiet now. They just hoped the ground would keep its mouth shut. Josiah said nothing, but his silence wasn't empty. It was a kind that pressed against his ribs, made his palms sweat, filled his ears with old memories. That night, he dreamed of fire, not flames, but the sound of it, crackling, alive, like laughter with teeth. He saw a man kneeling in prayer beneath the night sky, surrounded by shadowed figures. And somewhere in the background, a child crying. When he woke, the wind had shifted again. By noon, the town had heard. Mrs. Carrington at the Mercantile was the first to ask, "You really digging up the old church pasture, Bellamy?" He gave no reply. By evening, the sheriff arrived at the fence again, bootsteps deliberate, eyes darker than before. "Folks are uneasy, Josiah," he said, tipping his hat. "Say you're stirring up bad things." "I'm not stirring," Josiah answered, "just uncovering." Same thing to some. Josiah leaned against the fence. "You were young when Preacher Reyes vanished, weren't you?" The sheriff's jaw tensed. "I remember." "Do you remember what he did wrong?" The sheriff hesitated. "He was kind to the wrong people at the wrong time." Josiah nodded. "That's not a sin." The sheriff glanced at the hole, then back at him. "You keep digging, and this town's going to remember things it chose to forget. Might be that forgetting is how it survived. Maybe survival's not enough anymore," Josiah said. "Maybe it's time for dignity." That night, Alma left a folded cloth on Josiah's porch. Inside was her father's last sermon, stitched in thread. He read it by lamplight, the words clumsy in places but full of heat. The sermon was about water, how the people of the desert once believed water came from tears, that each buried sorrow, each unseen grief, soaked into the ground until it formed an underground river. And if enough sorrow gathered, it would rise again, clean, clear, and holy. Josiah slept with that cloth under his pillow. The next morning, Willow was not alone. 2 more cows stood beside her at the stone. All 3 stared down at the hole Josiah had left open. Alma arrived before noon, a basket of bread and salt in her hands. They didn't speak much, but she stayed as Josiah dug deeper. They found a shard of stained glass, purple and red, and a child's wooden toy carved like a deer. Each item unearthed felt like a breath held too long, like the land itself was finally exhaling. The pastor's old Bible was next, wrapped in oilskin, brittle with time, but whole. Inside, a pressed flower still bloomed, dry but proud. Josiah handed it to Alma. Her fingers shook as she held it. "This was my mother's," she said. "He gave it to her the day they married." Josiah felt a tightness in his throat he couldn't swallow. Not grief, not even sorrow, just the aching weight of something being remembered too late. That evening, they lit a candle beside the hole. Alma prayed aloud, voice quivering. "I don't ask for justice," she whispered, "just for him to be seen." The candle flickered, then held steady. Josiah didn't kneel, but he stood beside her the whole time. Across the field, the cows began to low. Alma turned to him as the last light faded. "I think the earth remembers," she said. "I think the town doesn't," Josiah replied. "But it might," she said, placing a hand on his arm. "If we help it." He nodded. "Tomorrow, I'll dig deeper." "And I'll bring flowers," she said. They stood together in a hush, the candlelight throwing shadows long across the grass. And far beneath the soil, something shifted. Not a ghost, not a body, but a truth long buried, beginning to rise. The third morning broke with no sunlight, only the pale hush of sky, unsure if it wanted to rain. The clouds rolled like bruises over the hills, and everything beneath them, with soil breath, felt wet before a drop had fallen. Josiah stepped into the field with the same shovel and heavier hands. The ground was darker now, softer, as though it had finally given up resisting. Willow stood closer than usual. She didn't lick the stone. She watched it, ears turned slightly back, as if listening. A second cow nudged her side, and neither moved. They stayed like sentries, silent and still. Alma arrived before the first cut of the shovel. She brought no basket this time, only herself, wrapped in a pale shawl and wind-flushed resolve. Her eyes met Josiah's with a kind of quiet pact. No words were needed. They had passed the point where speech did anything but get in the way of grief. He dug. At 7 inches down, the shovel hit something that wasn't earth. It gave with a soft crack. Not metallic, not stone, something old and tired and waiting. Josiah dropped to his knees and scraped away with his fingers. The first edge he found was curved, then smooth, and as he brushed further, a shape emerged. A skull, wrapped loosely in a blackened cloth, stained with time and dust, but unmistakable in its symmetry. Josiah froze. Alma took in a single breath, sharp and ragged. The sheriff's voice came low and immediate from behind them. "That's enough." Josiah didn't turn. "You knew this was here," he said flatly. "I knew something was," the sheriff said, spurs ringing faint against the stones as he stepped forward. "I didn't want to believe it." Josiah stood, facing him. The sheriff's jaw was hard, his hands relaxed, but his eyes gave him away. Guilt or memory, it was hard to tell which bled through. "I want the name," Josiah said. The sheriff didn't answer. Alma spoke instead. "It's my father." Her voice was steady now, not defiant, just done being quiet. He didn't run. He didn't disappear. He was buried. The sheriff finally met her eyes. "It was chaos then. You don't understand." "Then make me," she said. "I've waited 23 years. The wind picked up, blowing dust across the field in long, snaking ribbons. The cows shifted. One let out a groan low in its throat. The sheriff sighed. He was warned, over and over, not to shelter runaways, not to baptize Apache children, not to feed them. Alma didn't blink. He did it anyway. "Yes," the sheriff whispered. He did. And one night, men came, not by law, not with ropes, with silence and dirt and fear. They made it quiet. The next morning we built a fence. "You watched," Josiah said. "I was 19, the sheriff replied. I said nothing. I've carried that silence every day since. The wind slowed. The clouds hung still again. The world seemed to wait. Alma stepped forward. "Then help us now." The sheriff's hand dropped from his belt. He looked down at the skull, then at the cloth, then at the soil. His breath came shallow. "Leave out tonight," he said. "Let the town see." He walked away before anyone could answer. That night, Josiah didn't light a lantern. He left the hole open, the cloth pulled back, the truth bare to the stars. He sat by the porch with his rifle in reach, though he didn't expect violence. Alma sat beside him, arms wrapped around her knees. They didn't speak. They just watched the sky. At some point, children came. First 2, then 5, holding hands, whispering. One little girl carried a wildflower bundle and placed it beside the skull. Josiah saw her eyes, clear, unblinking, not afraid. By midnight, a dozen had come and gone. And at dawn, the preacher came. He didn't wear robes, just his suspenders and hat, his beard white, his voice cracked like river stone. "Folks say this is a good man," he said, standing by the hole. "I don't know if I was one of them, but I'll say a prayer if there's ears left to hear it." He knelt, bowing his head. Alma wept softly. Josiah didn't move, but his chest rose once, like something loosened inside had finally let go. The preacher stood again. "What do you want done?" "Give him a name," Alma said. "And a marker," Josiah added, "and let the town know where it was wrong." The preacher nodded. "Some will fight it." "Let them," Alma said, "but let the truth stay standing." Later that day, Josiah and Alma carried the remains on the earth and laid them in a pine box he built from old barn wood. Simple, honest, no varnish. They placed the cloth over him. Alma laid the stitched sermon across his chest. Willow followed them as they walked to the new spot, just beyond the fence, under a cottonwood tree that had started blooming early. There, they buried him again, but this time not in secret, not in shame, not in silence. As Josiah patted the last soil into place, Alma stood beside him, one hand resting on his shoulder. "You know," she said, "he wasn't a loud man either, but he believed in doing quiet things loud enough to last." Josiah looked at her, then at the grave. "So do I." The wind shifted again, this time from the south, warm and smelling faintly of rain. Josiah turned to Alma. "Do you think the town will change?" She looked back at the stone, now repurposed, now reclaimed. "It already has," she said, then added after a pause, "but the real change will come with the water." Josiah frowned. "There hasn't been water here in years." Alma didn't answer. She just pointed, and there at the edge of the old creek, the soil shimmered. Damp, dark, soft. A trickle had formed, barely a breath, but it moved. Josiah stepped forward, crouching. He touched it with 2 fingers. It was cold, real, new. He looked up at Alma. "You think this was his doing?" She smiled. Maybe it was a sorrow. And somewhere far off, a hawk cried again, not mournful, not angry, just there, marking the moment. Josiah stood, brushing dirt from his knees. The cows had gathered again, close now, surrounding the cottonwood. He noticed they were still. No licking, no grunting, just watching. The stone, that stone, had been moved to mark the head of the grave. He wondered what else it might remember. What else lay beneath the town's quietness? And he knew, even before Alma said it, they weren't done. The ground had shifted, not just beneath the cottonwood where the grave now rested, but in the breath of the town itself. The wind moved different through Cinderfield, less like something lost, more like something looking for return. It started with the animals. Willow and the other cows no longer gathered at the stone, but they still lingered near the grave, keeping a kind of solemn watch. Then the dog from the blacksmith's yard, half blind and lame in one leg, came and curled beside the cottonwood roots. A hawk circled low for 3 days straight. No one said out loud, but the land had remembered. Josiah rose early, shirt unbuttoned, suspenders loose, and walked the line where the fence used to mark the boundary between sacred and forbidden. Now there was no fence, only flowers, blooming wild in every shade. Prairie poppies, bluebells, sunbursts. He didn't plant them. No one did. Alma came at noon. She wore a white cotton dress stitched with a red sash around her waist. Simple but proud. In her hands, she carried a sign carved in cedar. "Here lies Elias Reyes, preacher, father, defender of the forgotten." They placed it together in the earth, just behind the grave. No ceremony, just shared breath. By evening, whispers moved through the saloon and over dinner tables like dust on polished wood. Some called it blasphemy. Others called it too late. A few, only a few, called it right. And then the letter came. It was left on Josiah's porch in an unmarked envelope, held down by a stone. He opened it under the oil lamp glow. The handwriting was jagged, ink faded. "I was there the night they took him. I watched. I said nothing. My daddy was one of the men. I carry it. Still, you did right. Let the ground speak now. Forgive us. L." Josiah folded the note and tucked it behind Alma's stitched sermon, now framed and hanging near his hearth. The sheriff came the next morning. No hat, no badge, just red eyes and an 8 carved into the lines of his face. "They want to vote," he said. "Town council, whether to leave the grave or pave it for the cattle route." Josiah stared at him. "You already know where I stand." "I do," the sheriff nodded. "But it's not me you'll have to convince." Alma stepped forward from the porch. "Then I will." The vote was set for Sunday. The old schoolhouse, unused for years, opened its creaking doors to a crowd that smelled of dust, sweat, and hesitation. They packed the benches, back straight, eyes lowered. The preacher offered a silent prayer, then sat beside the blacksmith's wife, who clutched her rosary like it might break in her hands. Alma stood at the front. No podium, no elevation. Just her, lit by the late day's sun slicing through warped glass. She held nothing. She read nothing. She just told the truth. My father didn't run. He didn't betray you. He gave what little he had to those who had even less. He refused to let fear dictate his love. And for that, he was buried without a name, without a grave, without a chance to be remembered right. Some in the room looked away. Others stared hard, jaws tight. But then Alma said softly, he was buried twice, once in soil, once in silence, and only one of those we can undo. The room stilled, a slow hand raised. It was old Mrs. Carmody, 91 years and hard as winter wood. Her voice shook. He gave me my wedding blessing, when no one else would. Then came Mr. Blaine, the carpenter. He found my son in the canyon, brought him home wrapped in his own coat. Story by story, name by name, the silence broke like thawed river ice. The sheriff raised his hand. All those in favor of preserving the grave and placing a marker, raise your hand. Every hand rose, even those who once called a heresy, even those who once wore the rope. Alma stepped out into the sunlight with tears hot on her cheeks, but a new kind of breath in her chest, one that didn't rattle with grief. Josiah met her by the porch. She didn't say a word. She just leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder. His arm wrapped around her, slow and uncertain, but it stayed. That night, the rain came. Not a downpour, not a storm. Just steady, clean rain falling soft across the land. And as it fell, the ground drank deeply. The pasture softened. The flowers opened wider. And where the creek had long dried to dust, water moved again. A trickle first, then a thread. By morning it would be a stream. They stood at the cottonwood, side by side, the gravestone polished by rainfall, the sign held firm. Alma whispered, "It's like the land is baptizing him again." Josiah nodded. "Maybe it's baptizing us all." The cows grazed nearby. Willow let out a low sound, not mournful, something like a hum. Children danced barefoot in the puddles beside the barn. A girl tied a red ribbon to the cottonwood trunk. And behind them, in the schoolhouse, the preacher began building a new altar, this one made not of wood and nails, but of memory. As dusk settled, Alma took Josiah's hand in hers, callous fingers brushing callous fingers. No word exchanged, just warmth. And far across the pasture, lit by the last slice of golden light, the stone that once held only silence now held a name. Elias Reyes, the man the town remembered. And beneath it all, water flowed, not just in the earth, but in the hearts of those who had once let the soil forget. If you find yourself standing beside something half-buried, a memory, a name, a shame passed down, don't walk past it. Sometimes the smallest act of remembrance is enough to make the water return. Sometimes it takes a cow licking a stone to remind a whole town how to be human again. And maybe, just maybe, that's how healing begins.